Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. John Minatelli. I'm Senior Vice President of Business Development. I wanted to welcome you to today's seminar. We're going to be talking about emerging adulteration in the global market for saw palmetto extract. And during this very compact but dense presentation, I'm going to provide you with a history of saw palmetto, what the harvest looks like, the market size, some of the market challenges that we face in our industry, what exactly differentiates saw palmetto extract from other native oils, and why adulteration occurs, how it occurs, and when it occurs, what kinds of adulterants you might expect to see, and how Valensa addresses the adulteration problem. If any of you, I don't know if how many of you know me, but I have over 40 years of experience in the fine chemical, pharmaceutical, and also nutraceutical world. I have a PhD in organic chemistry and also did postdoctoral research at the College of Pharmacy and Medicinal Chemistry at Ohio State. The history of saw palmetto is quite interesting. The plants that are surrounding our facility right here in Central Florida are actually ancient, and the Native Americans have been using saw palmetto for at least 2 millennia. Here in Central Florida. And I might add that this particular mutant palm, Serona ripens, is only indigenous to Florida. It does not grow in China. It does not grow in India. It does not grow in Central or South America. And in fact, Eli Lilly built his company on the development of natural products. And therefore, he came down to Florida, discovered what the Seminole Indians were involved with in terms of harvesting saw palmetto berries, and quickly understood that saw palmetto had a very unique property, and that is that it was a great expectorant, and it also provided for a healthy prostate and urinary flow. So in 1907, he set up the very first drying station at Vero Beach, Florida. And in 1908, he made sure that the saw palmetto was actually included in the United States Pharmacopoeia, where it remained until 1946, when most natural medicines were withdrawn and replaced with what we consider to be modern prescription drugs. However, I want all of you to know that thankfully saw palmetto is back in many compendials, including the EU compendial as well as the United States Pharmacopoeia. By the 1950s, the natural medicine had gained a substantial popularity in much of the European Union, where firms such as Schwabe, Pierre Fabre, Tad, and Evers reintroduced standardized saw palmetto extracts as registered drugs. So these are actually drug master filed companies with clinical trials to support these products that are sold in Europe. And they're very, very popular, as you will see very shortly. And during the intervening years, not only have these initial firms conducted saw palmetto clinical trials, but many clinical trials, in fact, something like 98 clinical trials have been conducted, and they all clearly confirm the efficacy and safety of saw palmetto extracts for the treatment of benign prostatic hyperplasia. Saw palmetto extract has also been occasionally used for the treatment of androgenic alopecia, and I'll explain that in a little bit more detail as we move forward. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that saw palmetto, unlike all other dietary supplements that are sold in the United States, is actually a registered drug in Europe. Going on to our next slide on the history, I wanted to share with you a very close look at the 2016 harvest. In 2016, the harvest was estimated at 4,720 metric dry tons of saw palmetto berries. These were derived by hand picking of 35 million pounds of fresh berries that were valued at $81 million prior to drying. The fresh berries are hand-picked on available land throughout the state of Florida and into the lower extremities of southern Georgia. This plant grows nowhere else in the world. Wet berries have to be dried within 5 days or they will spoil. So there are at least 8 to 10 commercial berry drying processors that are located throughout the state of Florida. However, there are many more buying stations that actually bring the berries to the processors during the harvest, which occurs between mid-August and October. Once the berries are dried, they're very stable and can be stored for years. And in fact, the Europeans store at least 2 years of supply for reasons I will provide you a little bit later in the slideshow. But anyway, the dried berries are extracted in any of 3 different methods. Here in the United States, all of the saw palmetto berries are extracted with supercritical CO2, and in fact, that represents the Valensa process as well as our competitor's process here in the United States. However, in Europe, the drug master files require extraction with either hexane or ethanol. So if you take a look at the market size, you'll begin to understand the significance of the adulteration issue and why it's such an attractive area for adulteration. In fact, in the United States and throughout the world, it's the 5th largest selling dietary supplement. In 2016, the dried berry crop was valued at $99 million. And because of its extensive use as a first line of therapy in the European Union, nearly 80% of the dried crop is actually sold into Europe, while the rest of the crop, about 120 metric tons of oil, services both the U.S. and the growing Asian market. The total 2016 global extract volume, therefore, is approximately 520 metric tons, or about 11% of the dry berry weight. And that was valued at about $105 million prior to its conversion to encapsulated product. So you can see that a very large portion of the total cost of saw palmetto extract is involved actually in berry picking and berry drying, where landowners and pickers and dryers make a significant amount of money just to bring the crop to the point where it can be extracted. Now, fortunately, in the United States and around the world, the value of the encapsulated product is of much greater value than the extract itself. And a typical example out of the current literature tells us that the product is valued at about $1,000 per kilogram on an active ingredient basis at the retail level in its encapsulated form. So taking a look at that, we can understand that the retail market value of the offered finished products on a global basis represents about $750 million. And this is one of the key reasons why people are interested in adulteration of saw palmetto extract. The United States portion of that retail market is about $200 million. And Erie data has shown us that there are over 240 distinct offerings that are available in the retail market space that include both single and multi-ingredient formulations. For those who don't know, the typical clinically effective dose of saw palmetto is 320 milligrams per day. So the retail market value provides ample economic drivers for product adulteration, as does the new demand that is coming out of the Asia-Pacific Rim. Interestingly, this mutant palm only grows in a very small geographical area on a global basis. Virtually all of the crop that is harvested or is available for harvest is in Florida and the lower reaches of southern Georgia. And all of it is wild harvested. There have been many attempts to try to cultivate the mutant palm, and it simply will not flower and bear berries when it's cultivated. So very, very low levels of cultivation are available. And of course, every year we have a variable pool, and because of that, we have a variable annual harvest size. And weather has a major impact on the crop. For example, if we get rains in the early month of June, when the plant is flowering, we end up with what's called flower drop. And if we get rains towards the end of the season, as the berries are beginning to ripen, they will develop a fungus, which is associated with very significant berry drop. So the weather plays a major role in the availability of the harvest on an annualized basis. And when we do have a bad year, we will definitely have an issue with supply and demand. And what we're seeing over the past 4 years is a fundamental shift in buying of this particular crop. At the present time, we're almost in an uncontrolled wet berry pricing situation, and this is pushing is likely to push the product out of the marketplace at the retail level. And the reason for that is we're already selling saw palmetto extract at very little margin at a value of about $200 per kilo, $200 to $250 per kilo. And you can see that's 1/5 of the total retail value here in the United States. And that is not leaving enough margin for people at the retail level to want to sell the product. They can make margins on other products instead. So we're very concerned about that, and we're doing everything we can to avoid raising that price any further. Every year we also see legal attempts to limit state land harvesting in deference to the black bear population here in Florida. There's a vast area of state land that is managed by the state, and for example in 2015 was not available for picking of saw palmetto berries. Since 80% of the saw palmetto harvest does move to the EU, when the EU buyers come, they always buy what I call the heart cut of the crop. That is the ripest of these berries. And as soon as they arrive at Immokalee, which is where the key buying area is for wet berries, they continue to drive year-over-year pricing because they have a tremendous demand for berries and the extract in Europe. In fact, things have been so bad that over the years, several sham products have been developed and are actually available in the United States market. These are not seen in the European market, but people are actually purchasing unripe green berries, and they are simply drying the berries and powdering the berries and then encapsulating them in hard shell capsules at the same 320 milligram dose that you would see, which would be quite common in a saw palmetto extract. Unfortunately, that only offers about 1/10 of the effective clinical dose, and so we see a wide range of these products available in the U.S. market. We're trying to get that taken care of as well. And since we've been in this business for over 25 years, we've seen blatant adulteration as well as neutral seed oil mimetics for some time. And literally, we have seen it all here as one of the key players in the U.S. market. And unfortunately, those people in the industry who are responsible for Part 2011 CGMP requirements for production of encapsulated product are not doing sufficient analytical release testing to authenticate the product that they are being sold by key providers in the industry. And until that happens, until that issue is resolved, we're going to continue to see products in the marketplace that do not come even close to a saw palmetto. Now, saw palmetto is a very unusual berry, and its extract is also very unusual. And on this page, I wanted to help all of you listeners understand how much different the product really is and how easy it is to authenticate this particular product. First of all, saw palmetto can be found either as a light oil or as a very dark colored oil. In fact, we make a very dark colored oil here because we use what we call deep extract, which is a very high pressure supercritical CO2 extraction methodology. And all saw palmetto has a very characteristic sharp, pungent odor. And what's very unusual about the product is it contains free fatty acids. Most seed oils are triacylglycerides, or what we call neutral oils. So it's very acidic in taste. It's very bitter. And in fact, if you dab a little bit of the extract and you put it on your tongue, you'll find out why the Indians used this product as an expectorant. Your salivary glands will go into hyperdrive, and you'll spit out the little bit of material that you put on your tongue, and you'll be spitting for the next hour as your salivary glands try to get rid of the saw palmetto extract that you've put on your tongue. And it has three very important chemical characteristics. It contains very unusually high levels of lauric acid and myristic acid. That's a C12 and a C14 acid. And, in fact, lauric acid is so high relative to other carboxylic acids that are available in the seed oil that you can authenticate the seed oil based on the ratio of all other fatty acids to lauric acid. And this forms the basis for the USP compendial specification that exists today. It also contains phytosterols as well as long-chain fatty acid alcohols. So we've seen product that actually authenticates on ratio against the current USP specification, and it may even contain phytosterols, but it contains no long-chain fatty alcohols. And that's a dead giveaway that that is not a saw palmetto product. So in order to get authentic product, all three of these ingredients must be present. You must have the correct ratio of all acids to lauric acid. You have to have phytosterols, and you have to have long-chain fatty alcohols present. So one asks then, why is there saw palmetto adulteration? And I touched on that earlier, indicating that at retail level this product is worth almost $750 million. But why, when, and where does that happen? As I've spoken to you before, that's driven by the economics of supply and demand. And crop harvest demands are very high, and it's a complete cash upfront business. So I told you that the crop is purchased for about $81 million. All of that is cash business, cash transaction. And of course there's limited access here in the United States to that type of funding, as you might expect. So not very many people have that kind of cash available to handle crop purchases to the extent that you see in this particular crop. And if we have a relatively poor harvest season, there is very high EU demand. This is why the folks in the European Union typically store 2 years of saw palmetto berries, because they know that the harvest itself can be highly variable. But when you have a really poor season, like a hurricane season, at the wrong period of time during the berry growing season, you'll have very few berries available, and this is highly disruptive. In addition to that, we're seeing a lot of new demand from the Asia-Pacific Rim, and this is disrupting the current essentially balanced supply and demand situation. Along with that, we have a new president that is involved in a crackdown on illegal immigrants, and these people are by and large responsible for harvesting of the product. In addition to that, as we mentioned before, not everybody is using all the analytical tools available and necessary to ensure that their products are not adulterated. But one thing we can tell you for sure is that if your saw palmetto extract country of origin is India or China, it simply does not grow there, and that extract cannot come from there. And this is where we're seeing a lot of this adulterated product coming in. And furthermore, if you're offered a price that's well below market price, I can guarantee you, with the very high demand from Europe, that it's not possibly saw palmetto extract. Now, there are many known adulterants, and we're only going to go through a few of these things, but I want to drill down very quickly to what the real issue is. Often, vegetable oils can be blended so that you end up with a neutral oil that looks a lot like saw palmetto when it goes through the analytical technique used to measure ratios. Unfortunately, it's a neutral oil. And furthermore, because it's a neutral oil, it doesn't have any of the physiochemical properties that are associated with saw palmetto extract, like the acidity that I mentioned, the free fatty acids that I mentioned before. In addition, in the Caribbean basin and throughout Central America, there is a palm, which is a decorative palm, which is called the silver or Everglade palm, which occasionally we run into and can authenticate based on DNA screening, which can get into the product. It has never been clinically trialed for efficacy for benign prostatic hyperplasia. And finally, once the product is encapsulated most encapsulators do use vegetable oils as a diluent to help them soft gel this very acidic product. And once the soft gel is manufactured, analytical authentication of these mixtures can be quite difficult. So let's take a closer look at the fatty acid profile of saw palmetto. On the left-hand side, you can see the very high levels of lauric acid and myristic acid, along with oleic acid. Oleic acid is the common fatty acid that's found in olive oil. You can see that palm oil, which is a very, very large commodity on a global basis, has very high levels of oleic acid and palmitic acid, but it has very low levels of lauric acid and myristic acid. However, the kernel, that is the seed derived from a palm tree, has the right ratio of lauric acid and myristic acid at very high levels, and has moderate levels of palmitic acid and oleic acid. So you can see here that with the right combination of palm oil and palm kernel oil, with a little bit of added olive oil, you can basically mimic the neutral oil component of saw palmetto. However, these seed oils, palm oil and palm kernel oil, do not contain phytosterols or long-chain fatty acids or fatty alcohols. So what are we doing about all this from Valensa's perspective? Well, first of all, we're vertically integrated into wet berry purchasing and drying. That's very important. And of course, we always do source DNA authentication to ensure that we're only receiving saw palmetto berries from our buying stations. And we've also gone to the extent of testing our product against 5-alpha reductase. And we have shown that it is extremely effective product with respect to the activity of 5-alpha reductase. For those who don't know, 5-alpha reductase is the enzyme responsible for conversion of testosterone to the much more potent androgenic product dihydrotestosterone. And this is what's responsible for benign prostatic hyperplasia, or swelling of the prostate gland, as well as alopecia, or the loss of hair in men. So if we can reduce the level of dihydrotestosterone in the body, we can control hair loss as well as control the size of the prostate gland. Here at Valensa, we use the highest quality standards possible. In fact, our analytical release methods have been adopted from the USP compendial and been further developed for authentication. And therefore, our product always meets or exceeds the USP compendial specifications. And right now, we're working with both the American Botanical Council for development of responsible harvesting practices here in Florida, and we're also working with the USP to develop analytical specifications that will prevent adulteration from occurring in the future. In fact, we've provided the USP recently with 5 years of data on our biological extract, so they have a better idea of closing the ratio gap, which is a very wide gap at this point in time, as you'll see shortly, so that we can ensure that we can always detect adulterated product. Here in Florida, at our Central Florida location, we extract saw palmetto using supercritical CO2 in an FDA CGMP compliant facility. We have kosher and halal certification, as well as organic certification here at our manufacturing facility. We also have competitive pricing and a consistent supply on an annual basis because we're integrated. And you may be interested to know that we have the only patent-protected saw palmetto extract on the market. And we also, unlike many people, offer a country of origin statement. And this is where the rubber really meets the road. If you get a country of origin statement outside of the United States, you can be sure that it's not saw palmetto. So all customers are encouraged to confirm ingredient identity. And here we have a sign that we have placed at Immokalee, which is a responsible way of sustaining and improving overall crop yields. And that's by preventing the purchase of green berries. And you can see that this is in Spanish because most of the pickers are actually of Spanish origin. And this is all about responsible care of the crop, as well as sustainability of the crop, and it also eliminates the use of green berries on those sham products I discussed earlier during this session. So going to the next slide, you see that we have a very comprehensive extract specification, and we'd be delighted to share this with you. If you simply write to us, we'll be happy to share this particular methodology, analytical specification, and its associated methodologies with you so that you have the tools that you need in order to determine for yourself whether you're purchasing authentic material. The fatty acid fingerprint ratio of lauric acid to all other acids is really very critical to authentication. And here are the typical values that we see and are promoting at the USP so that we can tighten up this ratio specification. And this is where we're going to be able to eliminate a lot of the adulterating products once the USP agrees to take on this much narrower specification. One of the other things that we've done here for many years at Valensa is to offer end product producer or consumer the opportunity to have their products tested free of charge for authentication. And we're also more than willing to forward our test methodology to any independent third-party laboratory of your choice to ensure that you have the tools that you need to provide authentication to the saw palmetto extract that you purchase. Well, that ends my webinar for today, and if any of you have any questions, we'd be delighted to answer any of them that you might have. Thank you very much for your time. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for spending time with us this morning on our webinar on saw palmetto adulteration, and we've enjoyed the opportunity of preparing and presenting this presentation to you, and we would like to address any particular questions that you may have at this point in time. Please feel free to ask a question on the webinar page on your lower right-hand side. Hopefully we've been able to provide you with a very good idea of the overall crop size and where the crop goes during this presentation. I think it's very important for you to understand that a great deal of this crop indeed goes to the European Union, and that's why we see shortfalls here in the United States quite often. Suzanne has indicated that she feels that this was a great presentation, and thanks, Valensa, for offering analytical support to others, and we're more than happy to provide all this information to you to ensure that adulteration does not occur here in the United States. Suzanne has offered another question where she's asked whether or not people are attempting to grow saw palmetto commercially. Actually, there have been many attempts to grow this particular palm, and in particular in Central America, and everybody has failed. The reason for that is the palms, as they grow here in Florida, are obviously they're not fertilized. They grow under a wild canopy of additional brush, and so that basically they're very stressed plants. And when you stress a plant, that's when it actually creates berries. And furthermore, the crop propagates through either cuttings or rhizomes. So many people have tried to plant several acres of the product in places like Nicaragua, for example, or Costa Rica, and nobody has been successful in getting the mutant palm to, or I should say the small palm, to actually produce fruit. Typically, a new plant that pops up here in the Florida area will take up to 10 years before it will flower and fruit. So yes, Suzanne, you are correct. It's although people have attempted it, it's not been possible to do so. Any other questions that we might be able to answer for anyone in the audience today? Okay, well, if there are no more questions, I'd like to encourage all of you to contact U.S. Nutraceuticals, better known as Valensa International, at any time when you'd like to know more about the analytical techniques that we use here to make sure that our product is authenticated, and we'd love to share those with you to ensure that our industry remains a solid industry for many years to come. I thank all of you for the opportunity to make this presentation and for your kind availability as well as listening. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.